Good evening, queer visitors. Thank you for joining us in our third installment of our queer book club sharing salon. So thank you so much for coming. We have treats for y'all tonight. We have two amazing visiting hosts that are going to take us on a journey through the third book, Ozma and Oz. I would love to introduce our first guest, who is a lifelong Oz fanatic, Oz historian, and the founder of the Spirit of Oz character troupe. She serves on the board of the International Wizard of Oz Club as the member and publicity chair, and is recognized expert Oz collector, particularly in the realm of vintage and rare Oz books. As a trans woman, she has deep personal affinity for Princess Ozma, whose own transformation has long resonated with her and informed her scholarship and creative work. She's a trained actress who's often seen as the Wicked Witch and studied theater and literature at Ball State University and is currently pursuing their master's degree at Harvard. So, no big deal. And is currently the director of engagement at IYG, North America's oldest continuous operating resource center, an advocacy organization for queer youth and young adults. So please give a lovely queer visitors welcome to Zoe O'Haillin-Berne.
Hi, everyone.
Our next host is Stormie Daie, who is a Black non-binary femme from Durham, North Carolina, who has spent over a decade as a drag entertainer, MC, and show producer with the mission to bring joy to community by creating safe spaces and uplifting the work of the talents of Black, queer, and trans individuals. With a background in environmental and ecological science, Stormie brings a unique perspective to their work, especially with their in-person and online series, Science with Stormie, where they explore the idea that everything is science and science is everything. In addition to being a science educator, Stormie is a lead drag storyteller for Drag Story Hour and is a LGBTQ and North Carolina historian, specialized in the history of drag and queer activism. Stormie is really amazing and does so much intersectional work in so many different places. It's going to be a really explosive meeting tonight with these two powerhouses. Thank y'all so much for being involved. Thank y'all for listening and watching. Please remember that you can help keep programs like this free by texting queer visitors to 44321. And you can make a small donation if you can. If you can't make a monetary donation, please follow our host and follow us on social media and spread the word. With that, I will let our hosts take it away.
Hello, everyone. How are you, Zoe?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very in the spirit.
Same. You look lovely. A beautiful Princess Ozma.
Oh, I thank you. You're so gracious. And what a confidently Dorothy you make.
Oh, thank you. It was accidental.
You just ooze Oz. I'm so excited to be here tonight. This is my first dip into the world of the Wizard of Oz. Besides maybe excerpts or references, I have never read a work by our wonderful L. Frank Baum. So I'm really I kind of like that this is where I started, even though it is not at the beginning, but that also seems very into the spirit of everything.
Yes, the series is wonderful. You can jump in almost anywhere and find an amazing journey. He does a great job of catching people up in what's happened in his book. So it's not too hard to jump in, especially with Marvelous Land being the predecessor. It was kind of its own standalone book. And then I kind of feel like with Ozma of Oz, it's more of a return to the ongoing narrative. It's interesting because Land of Oz was almost like a blueprint to a stage production more than a direct sequel to Wizard of Oz. So it's kind of this like fascinating little thing. But Ozma of Oz obviously brings us back the character of Dorothy, because Baum was just inundated with letters from little kids saying, but what about Dorothy, because she wasn't in the second book.
I usually don't read a forward, so I was like, I'm really gonna get to know her. I kind of appreciated that in this social influencing world that we live in, that Baum was like, you know what, they want more Dorothy, I'm gonna give them more. And I think I don't know if I was enamored with Dorothy before. I think I'm a friend of Dorothy now.
She comes back with so much more attitude in this book. She is, she's older. There's about 7 years difference between the two books. I don't think it's supposed to have been 7 years, but maybe it would. In Wonderful Wizard, literary people don't really agree what her age is. Some people say that she's as young as 6. Some people say she's as old as 12. If we say that she was 7 in Wonderful Wizard, she's 14 now. So she's kind of got that bite of a young teenage girl.
A friend pointed out to me they've never read a book where a man writes a female lead as a person. And I was like, I had never thought about it. Dorothy feels like a very honest girl. I don't know how to say it, but I'm like, this person knows a little girl like that. She's a person. We know Dorothy.
Yeah, Baum writes I would say Baum writes girls better than he writes boys. Part of that is his mother-in-law, Matilda Gage, was one of the most famous suffragists of her time. So he had this influence of strong women, which is why in Oz, it's very much a matriarchy. He is very clear that women should be in power. When you look at the first one with Wonderful Wizard, here comes the wizard. He's supposed to be this man that's in charge of the country, but then you find out he's just this little guy hiding behind a screen pretending to be big and bad, but he's afraid of these witches because the witches are more powerful. And then in Land of Oz, the rightful ruler of Oz is a young girl, not just a girl, a trans girl, arguably, depending on how you read the story. Some people will argue with that reading, but that's the beautiful thing about literature. It's so up for interpretation. Ozma resonates as trans to so many of us, and I think that's a very important representation. Baum's mother-in-law was also a honorary member of an indigenous tribe because she advocated for them. So it is possible that Baum was even aware of the idea of two-spirit people at the time. I'm just really excited to share this with people who are interested.
I think that's fun to know. Let us know if y'all found that. I found all of those tidbits interesting.
Unfortunately, later Baum had actually earlier than the Oz books, Baum had a little bit of he really put his foot in his mouth about some of the things he said about indigenous people. So it's kind of like we take the idea that he could have known about two-spirit people with a grain of salt, because he obviously wasn't as progressive as, it was 1880 something. I'll just leave it at that. But if you're really interested, there is a lot of stuff you can read about Baum and some of his writings prior to Oz. And his wife was also a big influence. He wrote so much from her perspective, and she was such a big supporter and champion of his work that you can really see his love for strong women coming out in books, especially Ozma of Oz is where you really see that coming out in full force. And one more historical note that people may not know is that the character of Dorothy is actually named after Baum's niece who died in childhood. And so by writing her into The Wizard of Oz and then later into this series, he was able to give this girl the life she never had and immortalized her because his wife was so devastated. She loved this baby. Baum and his wife had several sons, but never had a daughter. And so when this baby passed away, his wife was so distraught about it that he's like, I'm going to write about her and I'm going to give her this whole magical life where she'll be immortal for all time. And that's how we got our fantastic, amazing Dorothy. I strongly believe that he wrote her into the kind of girl he would have hoped she would have grown up to be, or the kind of daughter that they would have liked to have had.
That's really beautiful. I think you can tell that from the writing. I don't know if anyone else feels as strongly about Dorothy. We could get into some specifics of the book. I am dressed as Ozma. Belina, our Bill, also another good matriarchal character, but also maybe not that conversation of trans, but still gender identity and also self-identifying because of the whole name change. I loved it. There was this push and pull of you were called Bill because someone expected you to boy, because you can't tell. Birds, you have to sex them. Sexing birds is very hard just in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Chemicals, I don't know if we're a birder. You told me you had a menagerie.
I actually researched chickens, so this
hens have a homo or hetero chromosomes, whereas roosters have the same chromosome, which is opposite for how it is for us mammals. I thought that was it encourages in one of the last pages where she says, I could be Bill, or as she puts it so well, she says, Dorothy scalloped Dorothy scalloped it with Belina, how she edits it. Oh, she has post-it notes and she did not write on that scene. That was towards the end. So I really loved the way that Belina even kind of like we're talking about how great Dorothy is. Loki was there to give Dorothy a little bit of take her to task, I guess, give a little tit for tat.
I feel like I had never thought of this before. Whenever I think of it, I think about Ozma. And again, that trans narrative with her. It was only today when I was reviewing and remembering this book and how Belina can really be read as a non-conforming or gender fluid. I don't, I'm going to say person because she has the personality of a person.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
has these moments throughout the story where she embraces her henhood in some ways, like she's always trying to nest and lay her egg, but at the same time, if someone challenges her, she's going to get into a cockfight. Literally, there's that part where she's in the hen house at Langwidier's or the chicken coop at Langwidier's castle, and she fights another rooster.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
There you are. Oh yeah, that was interesting because I think there was a moment where Belina was becoming this representation of matronliness, which I think we associate with hens. We had to have that point put in there to be like, Belina ain't nobody's fool, but also I think in a very modern way, which I think you were also talking about the way that Baum's past truly gives them a modern interpretation of society. This idea that men have messed things up, women are trying to advance society, women having conversations with women that aren't about men, but I guess they're all about the Gnome King, so maybe they don't pass the Bechdel. But is the Gnome King a man? I mean, he's a man in the fact that he is a king. But what are the gnomes?
The story is about men mess it up and women have to clean it up. First, the King of Ab sells his family to the Gnome King, and then the Gnome King enslaves them or entraps them. We have to have this little, she's a young woman, has to come across a desert and say, listen, knock this shit out, cut it out.
And also to save these people because there is still this presence of tyranny. And Ozma, as soon as she heard, she was like, all right, as soon as I heard this, I was coming. Because Ozma, like, tyranny anywhere, we can't stand for tyranny anywhere. She was like, I'm coming. I'm going to figure out how to make this magic carpet work. And we're going to be over here. And then there's an interesting thing. So having led the Marvelous Land, love Ozma, clearly. I feel that I wonder, I don't have the background. I love children's media, anime, sci-fi, all of these things. I love Wicked too. I'm dressed like this person. I read the book once. In this Wicked world, I don't think we really hear how people like Dorothy or Ozma may have inspired some of these archetypal hero tropes. When I think of Sailor Moon, or I even think of an Alice in Wonderland, which I don't, maybe Alice in Wonderland came before. How there is this lineage of young women being oppressed because they're girls, women also not seeming like much of an escape for them because women are very oppressed. For example, Langwidere. I mispronounced that woman's name so many times. Really, there are some negative tropes, like she's obsessed with her beauty and she's kind of haughty. It's just like, ma'am, you are alternate. She's clearly not supposed to be ruler. And she's like, yes, I shouldn't be the ruler. I never really talked in such a modern sense, even with Wicked being a fan fiction narrative. You're right, it has this very modern feel to it because of the empowered way, the women nature of it. It's giving Sailor Moon, it's giving Studio Ghibli.
And it's funny because the feminist vibes of these books got them banned in the 50s from some libraries and schools. It got banned for a whole bunch of different reasons, but one of them was that women were shown as being more powerful and more knowledgeable in good leadership qualities than men. Some called it communist, which, that's just kind of like American history. If we don't like a style of leadership, we're going to call it communism, whether it is or not. There's also the good old fashioned witchcraft, which you always hear these arguments about children's books and witchcraft, but when you go back, what is the fear of witchcraft rooted in? It's the fear of powerful women. When you go back to 1692 in Salem, it wasn't about actual witches and the devil. It was these women are not conforming to our idea of society. Therefore, they must be witches and they must be evil.
I think when you say witches, a lot of people connect witches not only back to the ownership of property by women, but also women who thought opposite of what everyone else thought. Oftentimes in terms to medicine or working with people in and around them, different communities. And that was scary to puritanical thought, but also in other spaces. In Ozma of Oz, I think a lot of the time the women are all very caring. Dorothy got swept up because she is a caretaker of her uncle and is taking this really harrowing journey to be there for her uncle, which feels like in the very most American Pie way. I can imagine that story resonating with a lot of people at that time, whether young or old, having to journey for the sake of family because of the changes that were going on in the nation with jobs, money, and poverty.
And it's,
Pretty depressing.
but there were still really rough times on the prairie in those periods. They've lost their house and he had to rebuild it, and the crops were failing. Throughout the whole story, she's a young girl who gets thrown off of a boat and winds up in a strange fantasy world. So where she winds up at first, it's not even a place she knows. It's this new place all over again. And the biggest thing you hear her worried about the whole story is, I got to get back to Uncle Henry because he's going to be really worried and he can't afford to get any more stressed out.
I also love that Dorothy still feels like she's written with an accent, and now makes me think of the characterization of Dorothy by the one and only Judy Garland. I didn't know that she's written with a little country. There's apostrophes and conjunctions, and she drops consonants and vowels, but she still speaks very proper. She has a high morality. She's like, we ought not, they should not be. How rude. You don't think they would mind if I just. But also, like, in a low-key way, it's still giving that Dennis the Menace quality. Like, girl, why are you out on the middle of that deck strapped to a raft? You should not, even in the moments when they're dealing with people, she's like, okay, they're weird, but I'm gonna give them a second. And I'm like, oh girl, you're so accepting, you know better. And even Belina, like, going back to Cells, I'm like, girl, you should know better by now. Haven't you been doing this for a while? But it's nice to see that she really is a child, but still there is this idea of, I'm here to take care of people, I have a purpose, I am also supposed to take care of someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about her language and how prim and proper she can be. It's funny that even when she's had it and she's letting someone have it, she's still very nice. Like when Langudier's like, I'm going to stick you in the tower and then I'll take your head. And she just yells back, I believe you will not. It's such a great thing because it's, that line made its way into the film Return to Oz. And I think I can only hear it in my head in Fairuza Balk's voice because she was so glorious in that role. And just the level of, like, she's mad and she wants to let you know, but at the same time, she's not going to be completely rude. I love her.
Yes, Fairuza Balk, shout out. Also, have seen only clips of Return to Oz, and it looks absolutely terrifying. Also, the Wheelers, which we didn't mention when we're talking about ineptitude of man. It feels like the Wheelers are like this joke on man, especially because why would something like this evolve that way? Why would men continue to be men throughout time? They might as well be as useless as men with wheels for hands. Something also reminded me of catcalling. There was something about them making a whole big fuss and a whole big noise. And Dorothy says, I'm a little girl. Why are y'all making a fuss over, I'm a little girl? I really appreciated this. Just like, yeah, haven't y'all have some act right? When we were kids, we said, you're a grown man. You're a grown man.
She's so brilliant. And bringing up the Wheelers does bring up a really interesting point that I hadn't thought about until I was looking at some notes that Jonathan provided for us. It's interesting that you can also look at the Wheelers as a sense of other. They are human. I mean, they're fictional characters, so I'd say they're humanoid, but it's interesting. Like, it is curious what. Sorry, I'm just talking myself in a circle here. Baum wrote them to be very human-like, but also different. It's like you're taken aback, and it's kind of a question you can have, like, in a modern context, can you compare these people to maybe people with visible differences, people who present differently than what we expect? Like you said, you can do the read of, it could be a criticism of men. There's so many different ways you can apply these characters. And I think that's something that in a modern lens, they would have never thought about this in 1907, but in a modern lens, especially a few years ago when they did the remake of the movie The Witches from the Roald Dahl book, the witches, the way they were made to be scary, brought up a lot of criticism of, is this ableist? Is this negative look at people with disabilities or visible differences? And I think you can have that same conversation with the Wheelers because they're not really a threat. Dorothy comes to that conclusion rather quickly, but the initial fear that I think she and any other people have when they see the Wheelers, especially in movies like Return to Oz, it's they look different and that's frightening. And that's the core of what makes them scary. Yes, they do have a gruff personality, but then you have to have that conversation of, do they have a gruff, aggressive personality because people have otherized them and shied away from them or been fearful of them when they've done nothing to deserve it?
That kind of reminds me, I was feeling some of those feelings less for the Wheelers and more for the gnomes themselves. And the Gnome King, towards the end of the conflict, they do go in a lot of detail describing how varied their faces were, and also how they were very much like the texture of stone. Generally, people like, we would not want to be with them at all. Describing the position they're in, because the Gnome King forces them to work in the fires, forces them to work in the furnaces. And it's just like, are the gnomes truly in control of themselves, or are they this way because of the Gnome King? I guess thinking of the Wiz version of the Emerald City, bring in another Wizard of Oz reference, is that like when you go to the Emerald City, everyone's supposed to be doing the same thing. And so there in the Oz, we see this idea of a ruler telling everyone to look the same, be the same, act the same. How long have the gnomes been under the rule of the Gnome King? If people don't obey to his will, we see he just turns them into ornaments. He just makes them into things to keep. Zoos, museums, the British Museum in particular. And also that idea of war and conflicts. There is this tidy story of how the Gnome King comes into context with selling the life to the king and the King of Eve and him getting the family. But then there's also this context of, did the King of Eve actually seek him out? The King clearly is a liar. We imagine if the King of Eve is a smart man, even if he's a proud man and pride cometh before the fall, like, was he tricked by the Gnome King? And even I think Ozma kind of brings it up in her original reasoning for coming here. She's like, well, if he was promised a long life and then the life snuffed out like this, then I believe contractually he did not get what he asked for. And the Gnome King kind of insurance salesman says, well, it's not my fault. And like everyone's like, okay, fine. And I was like, okay, fine, you don't beat a dead horse. It's like lawyering. Once one defense goes down, you have to go to the next defense. The gnomes are the ones who are at the end of the day under the service of the Gnome King 24/7.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's that age-old absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Gnome King got this sense of power. He's not being nice to the gnomes. And I think he's gotten more power hungry over time to be like, well, the gnomes aren't enough. Now I want to go up above the ground and I want to take this kingdom. And I think he knew. I think, like you said, he's a liar. So I think he was playing the king, being like, you sell me your family and you'll get XYZ. It leads me to believe the king probably wasn't very mentally stable to begin with.
That also feels very king traditional.
Yeah, and also, I mean, we don't really know how old was the king. Was he senile? You know, how
the queen is very young. The kids are very, there's like, a kid that's a little bit younger than 20. So yeah.
If he's older, he might be thinking, oh, I'm getting to the end of my life. Oh, I need this. I'll trade them in for this.
It did seem like the family was copacetic. They didn't say it was this awful kingdom. They just said the king was obsessed with knowledge and more and more. I don't remember if they said he was an awful king.
But I think we're just supposed to get that he was like, for all his knowledge, for all the things he strove for, he really shot himself in the foot in the end. He traded his family in for that. And then with all that knowledge, he was still miserable. His only solution was to kill himself, which is such an interesting thing. We have dead parents and dead kings and queens all over classic literature. But Baum was like, he got depressed and drowned himself. Like that's another way Baum was very ahead of himself. We're processing familial trauma.
I cannot believe this is the conversation sparked by Ozma of Oz, but it is like a father trope to lose the family, to risk family for everything, and then be like, oh crap, I really liked my family, but then not get to the reality of like, oh, I should go get them back. He's like, I'm just gonna give up. It feels like a modern story, a trope scene before in a film. One of the things that made me think of dads, or this idea of like male outdated theory that I feel like we keep going back for, TikTok, who again threatened to be, there was a couple of times, I think TikTok is one of the people who was just like, well, I feel like he low-key mansplains or gives the King of Eve a little bit of leeway, and he was like, well, he sold his family. And it's like, okay, is this because you're a robot TikTok? Or do you just Or it felt a little bit like, and it's like TikTok didn't seem very shocked or like maybe bad.
TikTok is very matter of fact. And I think it goes back to, again, he's a robot. He's actually one of the first automatons in literature. And he is very proud of the fact that he doesn't feel. He has a thinking key. He has his action key and his talking key. He doesn't have an emotions key. You can't wind up as an emotions. It is very interesting that he just sees everything very objectively. So there was no judgment statement on the king sold his family. It is a fact that the king sold his family, went insane, and drowned himself.
To me, it was giving like your grandpa or that old academic wise old owl from, Winnie the Pooh or something, like that ultra like, well, that's just the way it is kind of character. In this book, when we see Ozma and Dorothy, who have this high sense of morality and character and are the heroes, it makes me feel like TikTok represents this, not cold, but like I've seen everything happen, a little bit jaded. TikTok's old, he's copper, he's literally encased, rusty, and it takes like he's helpful as far as people put input into him, not unlike a tradition. He's still good, he's still useful, but he's like a little bit like outdated or a little bit like not with it. He's like, but because you awaken me, because you take care of me, I'm gonna agree with you. Grandma's gonna keep you in her house, even if I don't fully 100%. I'm still objective about your life and choices.
And it's interesting because him being a soldier character, is this Baum doing a military criticism? Geez, 40 years ahead of World War II, but you hear all these people, I was following orders. And that's a thing. Historically, you would have soldiers that were very much like, I do what my commander tells me. I don't think, I don't make judgment calls. I just do what I'm told. I mean, I wasn't around in 1907, so I don't know what the narrative around military was then, but it is questionable. Now I'm going to go down a rabbit hole on military criticism throughout history. It's my autism. Now I want to dive into that.
No, I'm glad to bring that up because this machine, TikTok, this brilliant, beautiful machine, there's only a few examples of his cousin works in existence. The first thing he's used for is to defend Dorothy or as a weapon, as a soldier. And he's a thinking machine. He's literally meant to think and do things of service. And the first thing he's done is used as a weapon. And I think that's also something that is very interesting, as you're saying, before the World War, is that conflict is the number one issue in all of these books, is that there are kingdoms, are people taking over power using soldiers. Even, we didn't get to it, but the procession of the soldiers, and it's one private and all of these higher ranking officers. Scarecrow made the army, military. Whoever's head was like, you get the best of the best, so that's all the generals. And then we just put one private, because if you don't have a private, there's no hierarchy because there's no one at the bottom. But you done stack the top, and it feels like, oh, that's a war room or Congress. It's just all the people yelling at each other, telling them to go do the orders, and there's one person who's supposed to do it. It's just like Ozma is still this childlike character because that's not something that is caught, but it's also very much pointed out over and over in the book how silly, I feel stupid this is, and it should not be that way, but it is that way. Like, that is how life is. Like, that's not how it's supposed to be, but isn't it often that way when it comes to power? Which one are we in? I don't know. The world of Oz, wherever these places are. We're in Eve. Is that the whole continent?
No, so there is a larger continent.
Well,
yeah.
Look, I don't know where we are. I just feel like Dorothy. But like, even in this land, even though it's a fairy land, there are these hallmarks that make Dorothy feel like, when they're like, wouldn't you want to, Belina says, wouldn't you want to stay here? I think it's much better here. And Dorothy's like, yeah, you're right. But I have someone I have to take care of. And I have family there. Also, Dorothy, haven't you been topsy-turvy with these people before, meeting people who have the wrong way of thinking? There are still issues with it, that even Dorothy's like, yeah, I'm gonna go back home, but y'all make sure no one takes over because they have a hot air balloon. Don't worship false idols just because they're cool. And also, again, sorry, this idea of the conflict was the fact that the slippers disappeared, and there was a conscious conversation about possession of this magic belt at the very end. I know we're skipping around. And like, this trait of power, like, are you going to do good with this girl? And then she's like, we're going to do it. Glinda's like, I think it's a good idea. And there's a council, like you said, of women being like, is this a good idea? again. So yeah, the way it pokes at, I mean, maybe just the issues of the world haven't changed, and that's really what we're pointing out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny because like you can see Ozma and Dorothy both reflected in modern day real heroes. Like, look at Greta Thunberg. Here is this real young woman who is making tangible change and standing up to adult men and saying, why are you screwing this up for everybody else? Because your ego is so fragile. This is a nonprofit. Should we not go to flood? Protect that 501c3 status. You see these modern reflections. There is a king in this world.
And honestly, they kind of do look alike because he's got little tassel, little wispy hair up here.
Yeah.
Have you seen the Grand Canyon? Have you seen Arizona? It'd be orange. And queer, I counted. I think it's 8. It says queer 8 times in some way, shape, or form in the book. I always love a good use of the word queer because it's just like whispers do. I don't know anything about, you said Baum had a daughter. We don't know anything past that, but I was like, you know, this world is weird. And you feel like, you know, you're referencing that the world has these rules that don't make sense. So then you must know that there are people in this world that are weird and would not be in this world. Even the reference to, oh, this is one of the things I like, Jinjar from, it was a part of the opposing forces, and they saw her, and she's like, you know, I'm a milkmaid now. And I'm like, oh, okay, girl. And she was like, it felt like this conversation of, yeah, we can get over it. We can heal. We can put things right. And then there are those who cannot heal, who cannot accept things, like the Gnome King, who cannot accept the way things are, and is heck bent, Hades bent on expanding his way of seeing the world because honestly just for fun. That was, I think, really with the wizard. Again, she gleans from the Wizard of Oz. She has not directly absorbed the material. The wizard at some point was given this opportunity because he was wowed and it was fake, and he felt he had to keep up appearances or people would be disappointed.
In the books, he's very clear that he wants to build this idea that he's this magical, mystical being because he is terrified of the wicked witches. And he's been fending off the wicked witches to west forever, and that's why he has to send a little girl to do his dirty work. But yeah, like you said, at least he was very cognizant in what he did, and he knows it was wrong, and he does have a redemption arc. I won't spoil, but there is a redemption arc for him when he returns to the series.
The king is really just like, I'm just doing this for fun. I could have done anything else. These people could have gone free. The contract could have been, and he feels like the privilege of this world. You could do 1,000 other things. You have the manpower, you have the money, and it's just like, I could, but I enjoy being a jerk. They took the belt, so it's like, I guess he is null and void. Whatever happens to the gnomes happens to the gnomes. Oh, that was what I wanted to say earlier. Are the gnomes these elemental creatures that they're a part of the way that the world works, or are they a product of their treatment by the Gnome King? That was what I was thinking the whole time. It's like, are they these elemental rock fairies that are a part of this, or are they appear as they are because they have been corrupted by the Gnome King's evil? He can't write 1,001 books. Boy got to live his life. I was just like, that's one of those questions where people are so far into the system. It's just like, you know, they're the ones, like you were saying, it's just like, are they following orders, or they just like don't care to even think of another way? It's just like, it's like those are the people you want to turn and being like, can't you see he has no power, you're being manipulated?
It's interesting because the Gnome King becomes the series' big bad. You know, everyone, when you talk about villains in Oz, everyone thinks of the Wicked Witch, but she dies in the first book. And the Gnome King becomes a threat that recurs throughout the series. As we go through the series and read more and more, you'll see that Baum actually does address that. He dives into what is the nature of the gnomes. Are the other gnomes as corruptible as the king? And so for anyone out there who's not read the books before, but this is your first time going through them, just know that Baum will come back to them and there will be a deeper exploration of their nature. And going back to what Stormie was saying, the Gnome King chooses to be a jerk, and he will continue to be a jerk several more times. And he escalates. He gets bored and he starts escalating how much of a jerk he is, all because he's mad because a little girl stole his belt.
And okay, modern storytelling, he's the original bully. Like, the era of the online bully was like, bullying is mean. Like, that was truly when we should have realized that was like, we are talking to brick walls. And it's like, bullying is wrong. And he is just a big old bully. He is picking on this little girl. He is turning people into ornaments. Even the fact that he caught and oh, is this the original catching a villain monologuing? I was like, not Belina, and I knew it was coming. I was like, oh, Belina go. I was like, yes, Belina has the drop on the Gnome King. She was like, I'm gonna fix him. I love it because she waited. I was like, is she gonna tell Dorothy? She was like, no, I'm gonna keep this on me. We gonna see how he play. He wants to play the long game. Belina's like, I will play the long game, Gnome King. I was so impressed by this chicken.
Reading the book the first time, I had seen Return to Oz before I read the book the first time. I thought Dorothy was going to be the one that figured out the whole thing. But the fact that in the book, it's like, no, Belina she's nesting under the throne, trying to lay her egg, but she overhears. And it goes back to what you said, the villain monologuing. It's the hubris. He thinks he's won, so he's going to just explain what he's done, which is so stupid. And it's also, I think, this warning that Baum's like, don't underestimate a woman. Grandma may sit in the kitchen and be real quiet and just cook, but you better believe she has heard everything you have said in that house today.
But you talked about how well Baum writes women, and it's because of the proud women's life, and it feels necessary for Baum to have this connection of Dorothy and Belina. I don't know if Dorothy has a mature version of herself, but I was like, Glinda, I guess the Wicked Witch of the West, they are versions of what she could be. Even the narrative of Ozma, I was telling a friend that there was a time when we thought the Disney princesses were all anti them, but I was thinking, weren't they just telling girls what the options were? Not to say that this is the only life you get to live, but just so you know, this is how life will come for you. Even if you're wealthy, even if you're pretty, you're a girl and you are a woman, you will be put into peril for just those two reasons.
And also, something Baum did that's very different is throughout his run in the series, later authors get into this, but he really resisted the urge to have courtship narratives. Like, so often you have a princess and there has to be a courtship narrative. He never introduced a character to be like, well, Ozma's a princess, she needs to get married because she can't really rule on her own. And I mean, if you read into the context, the books are just, we're here for queer visitors. So I'll just say the books are insanely queer. Now, whether Baum realized he was doing it or not, and I've heard historians and Baum biographers speculate that Baum himself might have been pansexual or bisexual.
Because he writes fantasy.
Well, and if you look, like, the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow are kind of in almost like a common law marriage, and Ozma and Dorothy become very relationship coded later on. This couple's already found themselves. Ozma, the transbian Queen of Oz. It is this really interesting narrative of women, and going back to the powerful woman you mentioned, the Wicked Witch, and like being like, this is what a strong woman can be if corrupted. That's a big narrative that Baum plays throughout, is he does give both sides. We have these bad male characters like the Gnome King and the King of Ev and all these different people who are negative, but you've also got Uncle Henry, this really caring, really loving patriarch to Dorothy. You also see Scarecrow and Tin Woodman. I argue that Scarecrow's more non-binary because they're only male because it happens to be male clothing, but it's literally animated straw. So you do see characters like Tin Woodman and the Hungry Tiger who are good, kind male characters, like the Cowardly Lion. He is very the anti-fragile masculinity. He comes to terms with it. He's like, I get scared easily. That doesn't make me any less of a lion. And then with the women, you see, while there are all these powerful, strong, wise women like Glinda and Ozma and Dorothy, the flip side of the coin is you've got the Wicked Witch of the West, who is corrupt and power hungry, like some of the men. You've got Langwidere, who's just, she gets blinded by her own vanity and makes poor decisions that way, even though she knows they're not great. She's like, I shouldn't be a princess or a queen, but here I am. And then in Land of Oz, you've got Ginger, who gets power hungry, loses. You mentioned earlier, she doesn't hold a grudge about it. she realizes that, oh, maybe I was being a little bit of a brat. Maybe I was being a little childish and hasty. And, maybe a man shouldn't have been ruling Oz, but what I did was no better. So it is this really interesting, like, Baum does give us a good duality to all these characters. He's not saying like this group is one way and that's the only way they can be. Even with the gnomes, we see that not all gnomes are really jerkish, because Kaliko, his steward, is not that much of a jerk. He's more of a, why are you doing this to them? And
He does. He asked, and he also stood the way he felt comfortable to be like, "Excuse," like it's like, "Hey," like, and even the Gnome King was a little bit like, like I guess as my steward, he has the right to ask me these questions because there is a part of me that thinks, and I don't know how to say this, someone could read this book, and they could be a Gnome King. Maybe not a full blown Gnome King, but a Gnome King. They could be a Wicked Witch of the West. There is this conversation of appropriateness in the book. Oz is a fairyland, but it still has its issues. Even though they're bad, there's still patterns and rules. Dorothy asks, okay, well, why? Dorothy speaks out against people even when they're telling her, I'm going to take your head off. And she's like, you will not. And so, to me, that is one of these other critiques where these rules don't exist in the world and they feel like they should. They're supposed to be these traditions of politeness, of how we respect other people. It was chapter 2. As soon as they arrive on the island, that's not chapter 2. That's chapter. The letters in the sand, and when they come upon the Wheelers, Dorothy says, I'm a stranger in your land. I have done you no harm. Why would you accost me? And I was like, and Tonga was like, yeah, why? And Dorothy's as a child, very strong, like, these are laws of the world. I am a stranger in your land and I have done you no harm. Why would you accost me? It almost felt like when we're talking about witches, it felt like a spell, like something I might go on and be like, why? And it felt so right to say that very early on, that Baum is like, if Dorothy is a child's mind is perfect or innocent, then for her, what she says becomes these truths. I appreciate that characterization of her. And also, as you said, the duality that brings in Ozma, where Dorothy is speaking. They're both novice and experienced in their roles at the same time, being young as well and new to her role, and Dorothy being in Oz, having dealt with these conflicts with being a child, new to this world now. And they have conversation, they converse, they sit down and talk. How rare does that happen? Often we sit down and plan and make a plan, Scooby-Doo. Like, that in of itself is this conversation, and all is of equals. Like, everybody, even the tiger, who I definitely think is a narrative for someone struggling with addiction. I'm not to, but there were times I was like, every time he's like, I could eat a fat baby right now, and I was like, tiger, if you say it one more time. The first time it's like, okay, we get it. The second and third time it's like, tiger, I don't trust that you wouldn't eat the fat baby if the fat baby were right here in front of you, but I'm glad by the end of the book you found yourself. You ate enough.
And it's very interesting. It brings up is it bad to think bad things, or what differentiates good versus bad, whether you act on these impulses? Because Hungry Tiger's another character that carries on throughout the books. He is always hungry for a fat baby, but he even says, I couldn't bring myself to do it because I know it's wrong. And I think that is a very interesting thing to talk about. Like, we all have moments where we have those intrusive thoughts, scream at the person who's taking too long at the ATM or the checkout lane, or this person I don't like is on the stairs in front of me. But you make the conscious choice to say, that is wrong, I won't do it. And I think it's a very, Baum writes in a way that makes philosophy and human thought really accessible to children. And he gives these moral tales without making them overtly moral.
Talking about the queer narrative, I think the queerest thing about Dorothy is that she's got enough of a lot of things. She gives me like a Zelda, this very much like, I know a little rules, I have a little experience, and I have my heart. I'm going to try and use all of these things together to come to a conversation about what's the right thing. Dorothy is very concerned about what feels right. She feels bad when she takes the food pail. She's like, was I wrong? And Belena's like, no, they're not wrong. Belena was there to be like, no, you weren't wrong. It was food. They can't even grab it themselves. It's not for them. It's nice that Baum puts Dorothy in this way where it doesn't come off as self-righteous or haughty. It really comes off as innocent in a way that it does go past gender because it reminds me of the Tom Sawyers. If well, I didn't want to, I was thinking of early book characters, but like it does remind me a lot of the stereotypical child book character, the Little Prince, little Nemo. Nemo is literally not sucked up into an aquarium, and he meets all them weird people, and they
Yeah,
have all
no,
these
they
weird
really,
traditions.
yeah. Yeah.
But these
And you
books feel more foundational than I realized.
it's interesting because you mentioned Alice earlier, and Alice was pre-Oz, and I'm sure that Baum read Alice in Wonderland, or is at least aware of it. But I feel like he took the Alice model and improved upon it, because Alice is this character that things just constantly happen to her. I've never felt that Alice was really in control. Alice also has a little bit of a brat streak, whereas I feel like Dorothy was very precocious, but she was also very polite and very kind, and thought things through. She didn't just drink a bottle because it said to. She asked questions first. So that's really
So I
interesting to see the improvement of the promises made in earlier literature.
And I think they stand alone because to me, in my head now, I'm like, are Alice and Dorothy the Superman and Batman of like children named here? Why don't we give these early books, these characters, these conversations? Because they are critiques about society and the way children experience things and the way society wants to be rigid, but maybe things are not as society wants to give. And also the way that a lot of Ozians or this land puts so much emphasis on how people appear or seem. The concept of the general's regalia being described felt like a critique of the military. Like they had so much regalia, but not one of them knew what it meant. And then none of it was organized or coordinated. And it did not make them look any better together. And I was like, mm-hmm. So again, you're right. It's very like Baum had their finger on the pulse of society and where to poke fingers at.
Yeah, and although they are timely in a way that like there is reflections of the time periods that the Oz books are written, one thing I think that makes them stand out from books like Alice in Wonderland, The Little Prince, Huck Finn, and Tom Sawyer is Baum's books can be updated to a point. I mean, we get into the modern age where there's iPhones, and I think Dorothy with an iPhone would be a little messed up, but even in its modern time, like Alice in Wonderland was always firmly set in the Victorian era. And Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer are very early Americana. You never saw them get an updated treatment in republications or film adaptations. But you look at Oz, and Oz was almost always contemporaneous up until the 80s. You know, we think of, oh, The Wiz was this modern update on Oz. But really at the time, The Wiz was following the guidelines we had seen with Oz. So in the 50s and 60s, when the Oz books were being reprinted with new illustrations and there were storybooks being made, they didn't try and make Dorothy look like a child of the early 1900s. She looked like a child of the 1960s. And there are storybooks and retellings into the 90s where she's being refit in modern clothing. And when you read the books back, even when they're adaptations that have been abridged or modernized, her language doesn't change. Her personality doesn't change. And it still resonates as very true and very real. Dorothy is very much a child of every time. And she's like the every child. I think everyone can relate to her in some way. And I think that's why the Oz stories are still so relevant and so loved today. I'm glad that there's book clubs like this because I wish people would get outside of Wizard of Oz. People are very crammed into that movie adaptation, which is beautiful and wonderful, but there's so much more to explore in the books. And I feel like Dorothy, as wonderful she is in the film, the Dorothy of the books is just such a deep and beautiful and well-rounded character. And so that's kind of my soapbox of read more Oz books, read more books.
No. Well, is that our time?
Did anyone in the chat have questions or anything that was burning in their brain and we didn't touch it?
Do you have a favorite?
I wish everyone had had their cameras on because I'm always curious. Like, what edition of the book did you read from? Because I'm, I mentioned.
Yeah, this is mine. Edition information. This was released. This is 1907 Britain first edition. 1907 Riley and Britain.
I actually brought this as a first edition, first state. So this is the 1907 Riley and Britain original. She's a little rough, but she's complete.
Gorgeous original paintings. So is this a book from your childhood, or did you come to love this book later on?
I was obsessed with Oz from early childhood. My mother grew up watching the MGM film on TV, and she introduced me to the film. My grandmother was a child of the 30s, so she grew up reading the books, and she read me the books all the time as a kid. So I've been in love with the book since childhood. I think I probably read Ozma of Oz the first time when I was about 9 or 10. It's always been one of my favorites. Her story resonates as a trans woman reading Marvelous Land and seeing this character who everyone assumed was a boy and went through all these adventures and then realized, oh, I'm the princess we've been looking for all along. It always resonated really strongly with me. Being a child who grew up in rural Indiana, I'm like, oh, wow, transition is possible. There is a beautiful life. You can really fulfill yourself after transition. So of all the books, I love all of Baum's Oz books, but Ozma of Oz holds a really special place in my heart because it is so focused on Ozma coming into her own. We only get like 4 pages of her as a girl at the end of Marvelous Land. So they get this first book where we see who she's become, and she is a fabulous, she is our doll queen. So this is there was a reprint, I want to say it was 1921 that they did this reprint of the story with her looking snatched and fabulous. This particular one is a Canadian edition dating to 1941.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Look at you. Come on, collector. No, I have to read the next one so I can read more about Ozma. I love this introduction of her in this book. I want to take you away from Dorothy, so I'm going to give you a taste of Ozma. And clearly, after one reading, I was for her. After reading this book, I'm with you. Dorothy is truly the every child's character. I understand why the kids were like, we want more Dorothy. It has to be like a first of like a literary character to be so popular that her fans got her a second book.
She plays a pretty big role from here on. So Dorothy and the Wizard, which is the next book in the series, is fabulous. It brings the wizard back into the story. Dorothy comes back. She has a new pet in that one. It's like she gets a new animal. And then in Road to Oz, going with the kids writing Baum notes, he starts getting letters of, we're so glad you brought Dorothy back, but where's Toto? Yeah. So Toto comes back in Road to Oz. But it's kind of fabulous to I always recommend, you said you tend to skip forwards. When you read the Oz books, just always read those notes from Baum in the beginning, because he talks about how the book you're reading was influenced by the little fans writing to him. And it's such a beautiful thing because he was clearly writing these books for them.
Again, that smacks of such a modern way that fans nowadays truly drive media. I think that is a hallmark of good media that is driven by the people who consume it. And for Baum to recognize it at such an early time and to have that rapport. Could you imagine kids writing letters for the character? I'm assuming there wasn't a campaign, like, to be like, yeah, would you like to see more Dorothy? It was just like, Dorothy,
yeah, there was always in the first editions in the back of the book, there was always like a address for the publisher to say, if you want to buy more books, write to this address. And I don't think they expected it, but instead of people writing, I mean, people did write and buy more books, but they were literally sending letters saying, I want to buy more books. Give this to Mr. Baum so he knows what I want to read. If you want like a really great telling of Baum's life writing these books, there's a really great musical called Oz by composer Michael Robbie, excuse me. And he has a whole song called Mr. Baum. It's just all these children inundating Baum with letters, and it's the biggest earworm. It's on Spotify. Highly recommend looking it up. It's a biographical look at Baum's life and how he kept getting pulled back to Oz even when he tried to go off and do other things. So that's my little plug for our musical fans. We're all queer here. We love musicals, right? Maybe it's a little stereotypical, but here we are talking about Oz books. So
escapism. Who needs escapism more than a marginalized people going through bigotry in this world? As a child reader, I think it's very beautiful. I've read a lot of children's books. Not all of them are written for children. There are authors who really get a child. For Baum, even at such an early time, to recognize children needed a voice and needed heroes and needed ability to like see themselves reflected. It was so important. I think that also, again, when we talk about like you said, the reason why all of this feels so modern is because of Baum themselves. I want to see more adaptations because when watching The Wiz as a child and seeing the way they modernized it into an urban setting, it really opened up The Wiz for me, The Wizard of Oz for me. It then brought home these narratives that you're saying Baum truly was trying to write in. War's effect on community, war's effect on people who are caught up in not being a part of the conflict. Or also just a young person's journey into adulthood and all of the options, but also pitfalls that come with trying to navigate adults. Adults are not always there for the good of children. But in the beginning of the book, Dorothy's there for the good of her uncle, excuse me. And like we said, even though the uncle represents this powerful male character, I thought it was very beautiful that in this way, the parent or the uncle is kind of the victim, like a Coraline, I guess. I'm now believing there's nothing new under the sun. Oz really was the beginning of so many narratives around the child hero, which I think is very lovely.
And I think that's one of the things that's kept it going for so long, is that it is relatable in that way. And also, though he knows how to write for children, he also simultaneously wrote in a way that it was enjoyable to adults. The fact that we can sit here 100 and I'm terrible at math, 100 and almost 20 years later, we can sit here and as a queer adults talk about this in such depth that here we've gone an hour and we're running over and we still have things to say, not only about objectively what the book is, but subjectively what it means to us and how it represents us, an audience that Baum may not have known he had back in his day. Oh, you're muted again.
The way that the queer counter I was keeping, I was looking for like, are there messages here? Is Baum speaking to us, trying to embed conversations? And even like his color, the last head that Princess Languidar wear, he says has chestnut hair and chestnut eyes and a chestnut nose. I was stuck on that. I was like, what was the point? What was the? It was like he seems so choosy, like he makes very specific details known. The tendon being turned into a pig whistle. I was like, is there not that I know there's like all these conversations about his detail choices and what they make, because he's clearly poking conversations at visuals or aesthetics or even color narrative, like the emerald green, and being like, well, I turned them emerald because of the Emerald City and you didn't even get like how people in power, when they play games on you, pick on you for not knowing the rules that you came up with. I was
oh this is
okay.
so much fun.
It was a good book. I'm convinced. I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna start from the beginning, and I will see you at whatever the last book in this series is.
Can we sign up for doing another one of these, because this was so much fun. I'm back to talk about more Oz books. I feel like I'm just gonna have to join the club now and even be in the audience. I think that would be a lot of fun.
I have to be there for this number one. You got me, Jonathan. I'm addicted. I'm an Ozian now.
Welcome to the party, one of us.
This really blew my mind when we started Queer Visitors, with the amount of people and community behind Oz and how deep it resonates with so many people and so many queer people. And the fact that Oz is one of those unique things where it spans all generations. If you were a child of the 30s or your great grandparent, everyone has a relationship with Wizard of Oz. And it's cool that there's this intergenerational through line, which we don't get a lot of with different pieces of literature.
It's so timely this week because how many of us have already seen or are going to see Wicked for Good this week? I was there on Monday, and I was actually thinking maybe this was a bad week to have this, because I feel like so many people are going to be going to see Wicked tonight because it opened in Dolby cinemas today. So thank you all for those of you who chose Oz.
So thank you so much, Zoe, and thank you, Stormie, so much. And we can't wait to see y'all again.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
It was lovely meeting you, Zoe.
It was wonderful meeting you. It was so much fun. I'm so excited to come and watch next month.
Yay. Awesome. Thank y'all.